Alright everyone out there in Banjo land, Mike Heading here. I wanted to talk to you today about an issue I see a lot of beginner players struggle with and how to overcome it. So here's what happens. Maybe you've been playing a few months, maybe you've been playing 6 months, and you've learned some basic slides on G, maybe you've learned, a basic Scruggs lick, but whenever you go to another chord, C, D, E minor, you don't have any licks yet, so basically what happens is maybe you just do a very basic forward reverse roll or something to basically just fill that time. And what happens for a lot of beginner players is they end up getting bored during those sections and they're not sure what else to do. Maybe they don't like the thought of having to learn and memorize all these new licks, but they're not ready to take that jump yet, so they just kind of play it safe and do a very basic roll on like a C or D or E minor. And like I said, they end up getting very bored, especially if it's a long jam session. So I wanted to give you some tips to break through that. How can we play some really easy licks on some of these chords maybe you're not as familiar with? So I have 3 tips that I use. This is what helped me break through that hurdle, and I want to share those with you now. Let's jump into it. So let's start with our open C chord. So I've got my middle finger on the 2nd fret of the 4th string. Middle 3rd string is open. Index finger 1st fret 2nd string. And 3rd finger, ring finger, 2nd fret of the 1st string. You're probably familiar with this one. If you're an absolute beginner, you might have played it without your middle finger down. It's just you're working on getting your strength, but that's the full chord. So that's our basic C chord. Remember, for this lesson, we're going to be talking about basic licks on other chords than open G. So C, D, E minor, I'll show you a bunch that you can do. And this is a process you can use and apply to any chord. So the first thing you can do that's super easy is let's take like a forward reverse roll on a C chord. Let's say you have 3 measures of that in a song like Worried Man Blues, and you're kind of getting bored just doing that same roll 3 times in a row. You could mix up the strings with your right hand. That's one possibility to mix up the roll. But another really easy thing that you can do is just pick a finger of the chord, take it off, and then put it back on. So here's how to create a simple, very basic lick with that forward reverse roll. We're going to start with it down, hit the 5th string, take our ring finger off, and then roll backwards, and then put it back on. So now you have not the most advanced lick in the world, right? But it mixes it up, it changes that pitch. It also is really good practice coordinating your 2 hands, right? You have to be able to keep your right hand doing the same thing while your left hand now is changing, which makes it more difficult. Really good practice, right? You're also getting the ear training of hearing how that note sounds and then changing it. So you can do the same thing with your index finger, right? I changed the roll very slightly at the end there, so what I'm doing is going and then backwards, take my index finger off, and then back to the 2nd string with my index finger, my right hand, and putting my index finger, my left hand back on. So you can hear that pitch change, right? So you can do it with different rolls. You can do it with a forward roll. Start with it off and put it back on. See how we're just creating a very, very simple lick. So we're not reinventing the wheel, but hopefully you can grab onto these ideas while you're in a jam session and a lot's going on. Or maybe the song's a little faster and you can't play that C lick that you're working on at home yet. So here's something simple you can do. So try with the forward reverse roll, like I said. Try taking on and off different fingers. If you want to roll down to the 4th string, you could practice taking your middle finger off as well. The other thing that's cool you can do with this idea is, let's say you say, okay, that's too easy. I still want something a little bit harder. what you can do is now, instead of just taking your finger off, do a pull off or a hammer on. So you'd have, or the opposite, you know. So there's very simple ways to make it even just a little bit harder once you've got it down. But step one is just taking on and off a finger. So any chord you're working on, open chord, right, you can just practice taking on and off different fingers. And it's not always gonna work 100% of the time, but that's where you just have to try it and see what happens. But most times with most chords, there's at least one finger you can take off and create a little lick. So that's what we're doing. So let's do it again one more time. Taking on and off your index finger, good practice. You can do the same thing with your middle finger, like I said. Okay, so that's the first thing I try when I'm coming up with a basic lick on a chord that I'm maybe not as familiar with. I just take one finger off, I do a roll, and I put it back down. The magic with 3-finger banjo is, since we're playing 3-note rolls against 8/8 notes in a measure, you get this natural syncopation when you just take on and off your fingers. So it just has that natural bluegrass syncopated sound that's really cool, because what's happening is we're going 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So we're going from a downbeat to an offbeat. And that idea of that melody note changing from a downbeat to an offbeat, offbeat back to an onbeat, is kind of that syncopated sound. So that is also really cool. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So the melody on the first 2 times is on a downbeat, 1 and 2 on the high string, right? And then and 3 and 4. And then we're back to an and. So that melody on the first string changes from a downbeat to an offbeat, right? So that's what's really cool. It's called syncopation. So that's what we're doing there. So the next thing you can do that's super easy, a very easy way to create more licks, is take one finger and move it to the same fret that you were just on, but now on a different string. So for example, I'm going to take my middle finger, move it from the 2nd fret of the 4th string now to the 2nd fret of the 3rd string, and I'm going to play a lick like this. And then I can take my finger off and move it back. So I'm moving that finger now from the starting here basically, and then I'm moving it to the middle 2nd fret of the 3rd string, and then I'm playing open and moving it back down, and I'm just doing a little roll. You could do a forward verse roll with it down and then take it off. Matter what strings you play, you're just practicing taking that finger now and moving it to the same fret, but now on a different string. You can play whatever licks you want. There's a whole bunch of little licks that work out of that shape and idea. That's all I'm doing there. Another one you could do is, like I said, a forward verse roll. Or start with it on the low strings, roll. Something like that, right? So that, you have to try that. This one, so the step 1, we're just taking the fingers off and on. That one is a little bit safer, right? Version 2, where you're now taking a finger and moving it to a different string, will only work sometimes. So what I want you to practice is just trying it and then trusting your ear. So for example, moving your index finger to the 3rd string doesn't work as well. You hear that note's a little out of the chord, right? So that one doesn't work quite as well. And what I want you to do is try it and see what happens. If you move your ring finger to the second fret of the second string, for example, that note is also outside. So it doesn't always work. But what I want you to do is try it. And there's a lot of value in the ear training as well. So even if it sounds really funky, I want you to take note of that. And you're building your ear training by hearing, quote unquote, the wrong notes as well. So it's not bad to move a finger to a different string, same fret, and it be totally funky or wrong, right? So I want you to practice it, but most times there's going to be usually one of your 3 or 4 fingers you can move, and it's a really easy way to create licks. For example, on that C, there's a whole bunch of scrugs, licks that work out of that shape, and all I'm doing is just taking that finger and moving it from the second fret of the 4th string to the second fret of the 3rd string and then back. So now you see how now I have 3 sounds. I have second fret, 3rd string, open, and then second fret on the 4th string. So now I have a whole bunch more tones that I can play with rather than just rolling on open, right? And just keeping my left hand down. So that's a very easy thing you can do. The last thing you can do, so thing number 3 is take an unused finger, so in this case your pinky, and explore around with it. So try going up to the 3rd fret, for example, so you can do a sound like this. And you could take your ring finger off, right? So now we're combining version 1 and version 3. So version 1 is taking fingers on and off. Version 3 is adding extra fingers, right? So you can hear how you can get a really cool sound like this. Taking that pinky on, or putting my pinky on rather, and then taking my ring finger off. That's all I'm doing. Same thing is you can move your pinky down to the 3rd fret of the 3rd string if you want like a bluesy lick. So that is combining version 2 and version 3. So version 3, right, is remember moving my pinky to a different string, and then now I'm moving my middle finger to the 3rd string as well. So I can get a bunch of licks like that. So that's kind of some ideas for C, right? So remember, idea 1 is just taking a finger on and off. Idea 2 is taking a finger and moving it to the same fret of a different string. And idea 3 is taking an unused finger and exploring around to play different notes. Let's take that same concept and try it over a D7 chord, right? So instead of just doing a forward reverse roll on a D7, I'm using the 4th string now instead of the 5th string too. You can use the 5th string too. The 4th string will sound a little bit better though. So let's apply that idea 1. Let's take on and off our index finger. So we'll roll with it down on the way up and then back with it off. So now you have a lick like this. That can resolve nicely to a G, right? Right, so, or practice going from a G to that C lick we just tried. C lick. Just taking on and off that finger just makes it sound a little bit more like a lick without the finger down. It still works, but it just sounds a little bit more like a solo. Same idea with like a D7 you can do. So that is an idea you could play with. Try it with the full 3-finger or 4-finger D. Try taking off and on your pinky, right? So playing with that idea of now changing the pitch by taking your pinky on and off. Not very difficult, but it's an easy way to mix it up, right? You can do it with this D shape down here as well. That's that same full shape. Now we're just playing the 2 low strings though, and I'm just taking on and off my 3rd finger. Taking on and off my 1st finger to create some licks. The point is to kind of see how many sounds you can get with relatively little work, right? You're not doing really any slides or hammer-ons, although you could. We're really just taking on and off different fingers, and you can create a surprising amount of sound. Try going back to a G, for example. Maybe go up to C. And then D, right? Maybe you have a long section of D, right? So maybe the song is in G, but the chorus starts on a D, for example. I'm just taking on and off that pinky and just doing a different roll. So like I said, it's not going to be the fanciest lick in the world, right? But it's a way to get started. It's a way to practice getting your 2 hands to operate independently. It's a way to get over that hump of, oh, I don't know any D licks. I can't do a D lick. I haven't memorized any D licks yet. The goal of this lesson is to have some small wins to basically continue that success that you've had, right? You don't want to get discouraged and get hung up and then you quit playing, right? That's kind of the biggest thing that beginners struggle with, is they'll hit a roadblock, they get frustrated, and then they give it up. So we want to continue with those small wins. It's not the fanciest lick in the world, but that's not the goal at this point. The goal is to keep you playing and not to freeze up when it comes to a chord that you're not as familiar with. That's the goal of this lesson, all right? Let's jump back into it.